Welcome to today's scans lecture. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory covered by the treaties of peace and friendship. We're all treaty people. So now it's my pleasure to introduce today's lecturer, Stephen Augustine, who is a hereditary chief of the Mi'kmaq Grand Council and the Associate Vice President of the Indigenous Affairs and Unamaki College at Cape Breton University. He was the creator of ethnology for Eastern Maritimes in the Ethnology Services Division of the Canadian Museum of the Eastern Maritimes in the Ethnology Services Division of the Canadian Museum of Civilization in Gatineau, across the river from Ottawa. He holds a master's degree in Canadian Studies from Carleton University and a BA in Anthropology and Political Science from St. Michael's University. Mr. Augustine has shared his expertise in research and traditional knowledge with many organizations, including government departments, the Assembly of First Nations, and various Aboriginal communities across Canada. He has been elder advisor to the Federal Court of Canada Judges, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the Human Rights Commission of Canada. In his role as hereditary chief of the Mi'kmaq Grand Council and by elders' trainings since he was quite young, he has a thorough command of traditional practices, his language, and the history of his people. Welcome, Stephen. Can I pass to you?
Okay, just a few amendments with my intro. Probably my fault. I didn't update whatever was sent. I had retired from Cape Breton University from my role as Associate Vice President on December 31st, 2021. And so the past 2 years, I've been Executive Director of the Donald Marshall Jr. Institute. And this past year, last year, I received an honorary doctorate from University of New Brunswick. So, and also an Order of Canada last year. And the other thing was the Queen's Jubilee Medal. I also received that from the Premier and the Lieutenant Governor of New Brunswick, because I'm from New Brunswick. So they're the ones that were anyway. So also I am being on a hereditary chief means that my ancestry, like my father was a hereditary chief. His name was Patrick Augustine. He was in the military. He had foregone the role of hereditary chief, and because he was in the military, he joined when he was 17 and went off to World War II and survived the war, came back and got out of the army, but he couldn't find any job anywhere, so he went back in the army and he joined the Royal Highland Regiment of Canada, the Black Watch. And in 1958, we moved to Germany for 4 years. So we lived in a place called Unna in Westphalia in Germany for 4 years. And so when we moved back to Canada, we were at Camp Gagetown, but I went to live with my grandfather, my mother's son, my mother's father, I'm sorry. I am my mother's son. Anyway, so my grandfather, Johnny Simon, he had taught me a lot of things before we moved to Germany. He took me to a lot of places. We lived along the river, the Rishabakto River. We lived around the Rishabakto Harbor, fishing, spearing eel, placing nets for striped bass and salmon, and digging clams, collecting oysters. So we kind of lived off the land. My grandmother which was my original grandmother had passed away before I was born, but then my grandfather had married an Acadian woman, Annie Thibodeau, and so she came and joined us once in a while. She would cook up lots of bannock in the ground under the fire in the sand, and just wrapped up in like paper bags. She would take the dough and just wrap it in paper and then put it in the sand, and my grandfather would put the fire back on top, and the bread would cook for about 15, 20 minutes on one side, and then flip side, it took lesser time, about 10 minutes for the other side to cook, and everything was ready to go. So a lot of my early education came from my grandfather, Johnny Simon, and then my grandmother, Agnes Thomas. She was born in Lennox Island in 1898, and my grandfather was born in Big Cove along the Wsitkamu River in 1898 as well. They were both. My grandmother was alive until she was 100 years old. She passed away in 1998, and I acknowledge their education, because it was not a formal education. It was not something you sat in a room and listened to somebody telling you things that you have to remember. These were things that I had to travel along with them in the forest and watch them cutting trees to make baskets, or collecting medicines from traditional plants and so on. So my early education growing up, it's as if they were preparing me for my role as a hereditary chief. And so my father's father, Patrick Augustine, his father's name was Basil Tom Augustine, and Basil Tom's father was Tom Augustine, and Tom's father was Noel Augustine, and Noel Augustine's father was Peter Augustine, and then there was Michael Augustine. And Michael apparently had been baptized on August 28, 1747, somewhere in the Shubenacadie River, along the river there. So he was baptized on the feast of Saint Augustine. So that's where the family name comes from. It was a saint name. So our history goes back to the early 1600s. I mean, with Europeans and French people, when our Grand Chief Membertou was baptized on June 24th, the feast of Saint John Baptiste, in 1610 at Port Royal, when Samuel de Champlain and Dugas-Dumont and Poutrincourt were all gathered there at Port Royal, and in 1610, when they came back, they decided to baptize the hereditary chief of the Mi'kmaq Nation, the Grand Chief, they called him, Kisu'lk in our language. So my ancestry goes all the way back to him, because his daughter married they called him a peace chief. We only went by one name, Alguimou, Alguimou, and Guimu is the name of a loon. So we come from a loon clan, and part of Guimu's family belonged to the Abenaki people, and his parents married as part of a peaceful relationship between the Mi'kmaq people and the Abenaki peoples. Anyway, so that's a little bit about my ancestry. And so a lot of times when our people are asked to speak, we have to kind of more or less account for our ancestry because among our own people, we have to speak with authority. And by acknowledging who my ancestors were, it kind of more or less gives me, and I don't like to use the word authority, but it gives me a responsibility to my own people, and to also educate everybody around me about our history in Mi'kmaq Indigenous peoples. We call ourselves Ulnu. That's our own name for ourselves, and I will get to how that word came about. So the Mi'kmaq creation story is really almost like our own constitution. It's like our rule of law. It explains how we came into being, how we came into creation, into this world. And so the Mi'kmaq creation story has been passed down as many generations as maybe more than 400 years anyway, among the Mi'kmaq and among the Abenaki. And so the story was, according to my version of the story, it comes from Michael Augustine, who shared it, because that was part of the process of making peace with the early French, and as with any other people that came into contact with us. Part of the peace process was the explanation of the Mi'kmaq creation story, and why we do certain ceremonies and why we honor so many things. And the creation story, more or less, it's a story that binds us Indigenous people to the land. It explains the land for us, what it means, and what is upon the land, and all the birds, plants, animals, and fish that are our own relatives, because we, according to some of our stories, we come from those clan groups, from the birds, plants, and animals and fish before humanity came. So we always honor and respect our origins. And so there is an ethical principle and values and morals in the story, how we treat each other as human beings, how we treat birds, plants, animals, and fish, and how we survive from those. So so the story is really very important for us, and it explains a lot of things. So if you can go to the next screen, Bill. I don't know if Bill is hearing. Oh, yes, here it is. Bill is listening. So in the Mi'kmaq creation story, it consists of 7 levels of creation. And the meaning of the number 7 is very important to us. And also we've come to realize that number 7 is quite an important number for a lot of other creations, I guess, and I would put the word religions. Our belief system is not considered to be a religion, because we didn't, we come from an oral society, so we didn't have a book of knowledge, a book describing messages from the giver of life from the other side of the ocean. And so we don't have what we call a religious instructions. Those instructions have been passed down to us from generation to generation through a culture of oral history. So it is very important for us, Indigenous people, to listen to our elders, our knowledge and wisdom keepers, and we never question them. We receive these stories, and we never ask, well, where's your sources? What's your reference? And do you have collaborators that will go along with your story? there's nothing of that sort. In fact, if you question our elders, it's morally improper. It's impolite to ask your elder, your grandfather, I mean, questions, questioning his knowledge or things like that. So it's a story that's been passed down, and we just accepted it, and it's been accepted over many generations, over 7 of mine anyway, that goes all the way back to the 1400s, well, 1760, and that's about 7 generations back for me. And so we have 7 levels. The first one is called Kisu'lk. And if I have made something, and I would say this is something that I made. This is a piece of metal. It's been forged and so on and so forth. So if I made it, I would say Kisidu na. I made that. So Kisu'lk, it's a shortened version of what we say Kisu'k. There's a W ending at the end, which is kind of an inclusive, meaning we've been created together. And then I'm going to go through these more in detail in a minute. So I jumped into the creation story a little bit too fast. Anyway, there's 7 levels. The second level is grandfather son, which we call Niskam. The Mother Earth we call Wsitkamu, Wsitkamu. The surface area upon which I stand. Our culture hero, Gluskap, was created on Mother Earth. Nugami, grandmother, wisdom, knowledge keeper, that's Gluskap's grandmother, came into being as well on Mother Earth. Nedawansam, his nephew, came in from the ocean, was blown in through the foam and rested on sweetgrass. And then Niganesk, which is also a short form of Niganaganim Kuzisk, which is the mother of Gluskap. So the central person in this story is Gluskap, the culture hero, and you can say that this is a perspective from Gluskap, the story of creation. So we can go to the next slide, which is it talks about or I talk about Kisu'lk, the Great Spirit. Bill, if I can have the next slide.
It should be there for you, Stephen.
Yes.
Do you see it? We have it.
So, yes. So Kisu'lk, as I said earlier, Kisu'k, the mystery of creation. We don't even know what it is. It's just an entity that is so strong and so powerful that even a human being cannot even, we don't even put a human image onto what we call or perceive as the Great Spirit or the Great Creator, giver of life, the great mystery, Kisu'lk. So it created the world, it created the sun, it created the earth, it created everything around us, and it put the birds, plants, animals, and fish. And this is an image of somewhere near a big pond on the Brador Lakes, looking west when the sun is setting in the west. So this is an image of what I consider our world, our creation, the sky, the clouds, the sun, the water, the plants, the trees, you name it, the animals, the fish, the birds, and everything that's living. So that's what we call Kisu'lk, the Great Spirit. When we do ceremony, I would light up sweet grass and offer smoke from the grass to the giver of life. Thank you for giving us this whole world around us, and thank you for giving us our lives. So that's the first level of creation, Kisu'lk. So if we can skip over to the next slide, which is what we call Niskam, grandfather, son. And we'll wait for the sun to rise.
It's there.
For the next slide
Stephen,
to come.
it's there. Can you see it?
Oh, now I see it. Yeah, it just appeared. So grandfather, son, and that's way up in Cabot Trail looking west with the sun setting on the ocean. And you might see Prince Edward Island if you look hard enough. So grandfather, son, in our language, we call it Niskam. And Niskamage is a term we give to our own grandfathers because our elders teach us that we carry the blood from our grandparents because our parents come from their parents. And so Niskam and Niskamage is a term that we apply to our grandfathers. And our elders, they teach us that we carry the blood of our ancestors. We carry the blood of our grandparents, our grandmothers, and so on and so forth. And so it is important for us to recognize our heritage, our lineage, and recognize in offering thanks to all of them that have caused our own creation. And so the sun itself, it's sort of like we have a term for the sun, which we call Naguset. Nagel is the daytime, and Ewaset, Wasit is it's shining bright. It's yellow, even brighter than yellow, and so Nagewaset. Now that's the ordinary term we give to grandfather son. But when we speak to the sun in a spiritual manner, we always address it as grandfather's son, Niskamij. We thank grandfather's son because it shines upon us. It shines upon everything. And it gives spirit to everything that it shines upon. Because according to our understanding, even a tree or a rock has life, because the sun rises in the east and travels across the sky and settles in the west. And if you are standing all day alone in the middle of a field, you will see your shadow will be moving. Early in the morning, it's standing toward the west, a little bit probably to the south because the sun, to the north, because the sun is more traveling to the south, towards the south of us. And so the shadow will be long, and then it'll come shorter and shorter, and it'll come towards you until finally at midday, your shadow you can almost be standing on your shadow, but probably you have a shadow facing north for a bit. And then it'll continue to travel, the sun traveling towards the west, as your shadow will go towards the east and get longer and longer. And so according to our elders, anything that grandfather shines upon and gives a shadow, and the shadow moves, that means that object has spirit and has life. And so we are grateful for Grandfather Sun for allowing us to see our shadows, because in our culture, in our language, um, Jijaamij and Jijaamij, my shadow, means these are representations of my ancestors that have gone into the spirit world. I remember I must have been, it was before we went to Germany. I was 9 years old when we went to Germany in 1958. And it must have been a year or so before that. And I was at a baseball game with my grandfather. And I think my reserve, Big Co, was playing against another reserve, Eskasoni, in Cape Breton. And the game was going on in my own reserve in my community. And I was playing around and walking along. And then finally, I got a slight whack on the side of my head. And I looked up, it was my grandfather. And he says, "Watch it." He said, "You're stepping on your ancestors." And I looked, and I was looking for, I thought I stepped on one of my relatives sitting on the ground, and because we were watching a baseball game. And no, it wasn't. It was his shadow. And so that's the earliest explanation that I had from, he said, you're stepping on our ancestors, and I was stepping on his shadow. And he said, those shadows are representations of our ancestors, and Grandfather Sun is good enough to allow us to see our ancestors following us, and we are connected by our feet to our shadows, to the spirits of our ancestors. So when I do ceremony and I light sweetgrass, and I would take the sweetgrass and light one end of it with a match, and offer the smoke to Giver of Life, and then offer the smoke to Grandfather Sun, and I say, thank you for giving me my shadow, that I can see my ancestors following me, guiding me, protecting me, and putting spirit into my life. And our ancestors keep telling us that we are carrying the blood of our grandparents, and so on and so forth. And we also are like breathing the same air that they breathed when they were alive, through our lungs. So one is called Gamulamun, which is the heart, which pumps blood, and Gamulami is the lungs that pump air into our bodies. So we are grateful to Grandfather Sun for giving us and putting spirit into our lives, Jijaamij in our language. And I'm not sure if I'm, like, the translation spirit is the exact translation of what it means in our culture and traditions, but it's the images of our ancestors that are connected to our bodies. And so that's how we give thanks to Grandfather Sun for shining upon us. And it swings across the sky every day, and we welcome it every morning with ceremony. And in the evening, when the sun sets, we say goodbye and see you tomorrow. And so it's an important element of our creation. The Giver of Life, Kisu'lk, gives life, and Grandfather Sun puts spirit into life. So the next level, if we can switch to the next slide, which is Wsitkamu. And it's made out of two words. Weskiji, Uskijiu, means like, I will take this little book and I will stand upon like this, Uskiju. And this is the surface of, we call it Uskiju. And then when we stand upon it, Ga'ami. So we combine the two words together, and we have Wsitkamu, Weskiji Ga'ami. And Gamu is sort of like an inclusive, I'm including everybody, Wsitkamu, the place upon which we all stand and share. So Mother Earth is a very important concept for us, because Mother Earth provides us with the birds, plants, animals, and fish. And it is with these elements that we survive in North America. Indigenous people have relied on the birds, plants, animals, and fish. And if you look across the continent, we will recognize each other as indigenous peoples by the skins of animals that we wear as our clothing, the feathers that we wear in our head as the birds that are local around us, the decorations we have on our clothing, the skins of fish, bones, shells, and porcupine quills that have been dyed. So a lot of the elements come from the earth itself. And so we see the diversity of indigenous peoples in North America by the birds, plants, animals, and fish that they wear. They wrap themselves with our Mother Earth, and we feed ourselves from the birds, plants, animals, and fish. So basically, we obtain our food, our medicine, our clothing, our shelter, our tools of survival, how we travel about on the land, on the earth, on the water, on the ice, and on the snow. And lastly, how we negotiate our survival on Mother Earth by doing ceremony. And with ceremony, we are negotiating our survival by saying, thank you, Mother Earth, for providing us with the birds, plants, animals, and fish, and so on and so forth. So it is Mother Earth that provides everything for us. It sustains our lives. So going back just a little bit, is the giver of life is the first level. The second level is grandfather son, who puts spirit into us by allowing us to see our ancestors following us around. So we are imbued with the spirit of our ancestors inside of us, but also we see them physically when the sun is shining on us on a sunny day. And then Mother Earth, she provides all the necessities of life to us. When we combine the earth itself, the water, the fire, and the wind, along with the birds, plants, animals, and fish. So combination of all of those things provides us with all our necessities of life in North America. So in Nova Scotia, there has been an archaeological site found somewhere near Truro, a place called Dibert. And that archaeological site was found in the early 50s, but nobody made any kind of significant uncovering or discovering what was under there. And then again in the 60s and finally late 60s and 70s, George McDonald, Dr. George McDonald, an archaeologist, finally decided to dig the Dibert site and found it had been occupied upwards of 11 to 12,000 years before today. So it's an old site. And so there were remnants of bones and tools, arrowheads, and so on and so forth at a site in Dibert, going back 11, 12,000 years ago. So next slide. So Gluskap is a kind of a shortened term. Kisu'lk is the more appropriate term. It's a longer term that says the first one who spoke. So the first human being. And his creation came about with 3 bolts of lightning. The first bolt hit the earth, the surface of the earth, and it shaped a human being. Its head was in the direction of the rising sun. Its feet were in the direction of the setting sun, and his arms were outstretched. And so he was on the surface of the earth, and our elders teach us that it was like elements of the earth itself, like grass and leaves and twigs and branches and sand and rocks and fish bones, fish scales, fish skin, meat, animals, birds, fish, everything coming together and forming this first human. And so it wasn't until the passing of one winter when the thunder spirits came back and visited in the springtime, and it started to rain, and the heat and the cold kind of causes the lightning to hit the earth again at the same spot where Gluskap was given his creation. And so our elders teach us he was given his fingers and his toes, all his other extremities, and 7 sacred parts to his head. Our elders, they teach us this is the important part of Gluskap, his understanding of his mother, the earth, because he was still attached to Mother Earth. He was still attached to the ground, and he was given all his sensibilities and everything. And our elders say, like a little newborn child that is put in a cradle board and is attached to the back of the mother. And that's how Gluskap was able to look with his eyes. And our elders say the 7 sacred parts to the head. First, it's the ears that he was given, so he can listen to the world. He heard the wind, he heard the birds, he heard the animals, he heard the world just growing around him. But he couldn't get up. And in the same way, our elders, our grandmothers, they teach us that when we were babies inside of our mother's womb, for 9 months of our lives, we heard da-dum, 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 da-dum. It was our mother's heartbeat. And so after we were born, the child recognizes the mother because the mother brings the child to her breast to feed. And the first thing they hear is the mother's heartbeat. And the child is made happy by drinking mother's milk, but also hearing her heartbeat. And our elders, they teach us that our people were hunting, gathering people that were always on the go during the day. And children were also taken along with us, and the mothers carried them on the cradle board. And they said that as long as the child heard the mother's heartbeat, the child will not be screaming and crying. So that's how they carried the children. And then they said Gluskap was given 2 eyes. So our elders teach us, they say, well, he listened from the goodness of his heart. Now he looks from the goodness of his heart. He looks upon other people from the goodness of his heart. And he's happy. And he looks upon the earth itself, and he sees the trees, the birds, the animals, and everything around him. But he's still attached again. And so he learns to see his world in the same way that the child sees the world at the mother's back, seeing the fire, seeing water, seeing everything around the mother. It's almost like an educational experience in the cradle board for the child, and the use of their eyes. They see that the fire is hot. They see that the knife is sharp, and the child is always carried in an upright position in a cradle board. And the cradle board is sometimes on a windy day, they hang it on a tree, and the tree swings back and forth and rocks the baby to sleep. And the cradle board itself, we call it Tiginaan, which means my other right hand, like for the mother, instead of carrying the baby on her hip and busying her right arm and trying to work with her left hand. So the term itself, the Tiginaan, the cradle board, means my other right hand. So the child sees the world in an upright position. They're always leaned against the wigwam, looking, the child is observing everything in an upright manner. And then Gluskap also was given 2 holes in his nose to sense his place in the world. He could smell the plant, he could smell the plants, he could smell the animals, he could smell the salt sea air, the salty ocean, he could smell the wind, he could smell the trees in the wind, the sweet grass in the air. So he could smell everything around him. And it was important. Our elders teach us the sense of smell is very important. Even a small child, when they're running around playing outside and they're playing by the river, and a stranger comes close by to them, the child realizes that this person doesn't smell like my family. And so they would run back to the house or to the wigwam and start pointing in the direction where the stranger is, and somebody will get alarmed and look and observe who that individual is. It could be another family member from a different wigwam hold instead of a household, I would say. So they would smell slightly different. And so our elders teach us it's important to also distance yourself socially from other people that you don't know well enough. And that really comes in handy today when you don't go up to strangers and put your arms around them and start embracing them or kissing them. So our elders teach us that's not the way to have respect and dignity for other living beings, is to make sure you give them enough social space. And the other thing is the sense of smell is very important to the young child, and for our survival as well. I remember when I was like maybe even 5 years old, maybe 5, 6 years old, just the beginning of my starting to remember things. I was with my grandmother out in somewhere in near Dorchester, New Brunswick. She used to take us to a place where they used to camp all the time, and there was a blackberry bush, raspberries and blackberries, and we were picking blackberries at that time. And then I had a really nice batch of blackberries, and I was putting them in my basket that she wove the basket herself out of black ash. Anyway, so she pushed me over, and I said, "Gee, Graham," in my language, I said, "Why are you pushing? You want my bunch of blackberries?" And she didn't say anything. She just kept pushing me, and then she grabbed my arm and started walking towards the hill beside us. And so we got up to the top of the hill, and she looked and she pointed at a bear with 2 cubs was coming just down. And she said she smelled the bear. She smelled the black bear, because in the summer they're all sweaty and they're black, and they smell from a distance. You can know and tell when a bear is nearby. So the sense of smell is very important for our own survival. And some of our elders can smell sweet grass. They can smell certain plants and roots on the earth, and they can smell certain animals, not only the bear, but also the moose and deer and caribou and other entities. So that's the nose, the 2 holes in the nose. So we already have the 2 holes in the ear from the goodness of the heart, looking upon others with the goodness from our heart, sensing our place and everybody's place around us through our nose. So the last element, the seventh one, is the mouth. The mouth, our elders teach us, it's the sacred breath that we take, number one. And then the air we breathe, number two. And then the water we take that comes from Mother Earth. It's like her life blood, the water itself. So we rely on the water for our survival. And then the food that comes from the plants and the medicines that come from the plant. And our elders teach us that if we are mindful of those seven sacred parts to our head, like Gluskap, when he was being given his creation, those elements are very important socially, culturally, morally, and probably, I use the term in brackets, legally, the ethical relations that we have and responsibilities for life and creation of life and the sustenance of life. So we are grateful for those seven elements. And our elders tell us that if we go around in our lives and we listen first, look with the goodness from our hearts, sense our place and respect the dignity of everybody around us, and then share the water, share the medicine and the food that comes from Mother Earth, which belongs to everybody. So and our elders teach us that that's how the Europeans arrived here to North America, because we didn't look upon them as interlopers in our culture and traditions. They were just other creations of Mother Earth. So we didn't chase them away. We could have killed them all because we were outnumbered them when they first arrived, but we didn't. We welcomed them instead, and we told them where to get and how to get their food and so on and so forth. So Gluskap was given his creation, and the third bolt of lightning that hit the earth in the spot where he was laying after another winter and another spring and the thunder spirits come back, the third bolt of lightning hits the earth where he lay. And all of a sudden he stood up. Wsitkamu. That's the term when he peeled himself off Mother Earth. But his feet are still planted on the earth itself. So in our culture, we belong to Mother Earth, and she doesn't belong to us. So that's the difference in how we perceive the world around us. So Gluskap was given his creation. He stood up, he turned around 4 times, and then he looked up in the sky. He looked at grandfather's sun, and he looked down to the earth. And so he decided to follow grandfather's sun as it was traveling across the sky and heading towards the west. Gluskap followed his grandfather until it came across mountains, they say, and an ocean. And then he went to sleep and waited for the sun for the next day. But this time he decided to travel back toward what he thought was the center of his creation. And he decided to go south. And he traveled south until he arrived to the land of red earth and soil. And he could see 2 oceans on 2 sides of a narrow strip of land. Then he decided to turn back, and he turned up north and headed all the way up to the land of ice and snow. And so he arrived up in the north, and he was cold. And so he decided he was going to go back south and then go back towards where he was given his creation, somewhere in the east of North America. So he arrived back to where he was given his creation, and he saw the spot where his image had peeled itself from Mother Earth. In fact, he stood inside that little piece of earth that was hollowed out with the shape of his body, 2 legs to the west and his head to the east, and his arms outstretched, one to the north and one to the south. As he stood inside, he looked up in the sky and looked up at grandfather's son. And if we can have the next slide. So before he could ask the question, what he wanted to ask was, what am I doing here, grandfather's son? Niskamich dalugay nadutit. So he saw the bird. It was circling around in the sky in a clockwise manner. And it kept circling around, and it kept getting bigger and bigger because it was descending, coming lower and lower until it landed. It landed right in front of him. And he said to him, I am Gitpu. I've been sent by the giver of life, by grandfather, son, and mother earth to be a messenger, because I fly the highest of all the birds and I see the furthest of all the birds. I am here to be a messenger for them. So if you want to speak to the giver of life, grandfather, son, or mother earth, you can speak to them through me. And the eagle said, you are going to, my message is that you are going to meet your family. You're going to meet your grandmother, your nephew, and your mother, and they will help you understand your place in this world. So the eagle flew back up into the sky, and the next, and a feather fell, not so much decorated like this one that you see in front of you, because the feather is such an important symbol for indigenous peoples in North America. When the eagle flew back up into the sky, a feather fell off from him, and the feather itself, it was heading towards floating down into the earth. And before it hit the earth, Gluskap grabbed it, and when he held it in his hand, it just brought so much strength inside of him. He just felt so fulfilled and so confident of himself. And as he looked up into the sky, the eagle was soaring and drifted away into the sky. And when he turned around, he saw an old woman. And if we can have the next slide. He turned around and saw an old woman sitting on a rock. And this is actually my own grandmother. She was born in 1898 on Lennox Island, inside of a wigwam. And when she was born, her great-grandmother touched her head to the earth to introduce her to our mother, the earth itself, and gave her a name, and gave her back to my great-grandmother, Catherine Bernard. Anyway, so it's just a little explanation. I used the image of my own grandmother as a person of knowledge and wisdom. And she's the one that's taught me my language and all my, even this creation story I'm talking about. Next slide. So Gluskap goes up to her and said to her, "Who are you? Where did you come from?" And grandmother says to him, "I am Nugami. I am come from this gundo, this rock on the ground. Early this morning, dew formed over this rock, and with the help of the giver of life, grandfather, son, and mother earth, they gave me a life of an old woman, already wise and knowledgeable. She said, if you respect my wisdom and knowledge, you will learn to live on Mother Earth. So Gluskap was so happy that his grandmother came into existence. He called upon an animal. Next slide. It's a pine marten, which we call Abistanuj. Abistanuj. And in Nova Scotia, they call it Bistaneuch, Bistaneuch, Abistaneuch. And so Abistanuj, Gluskap calls upon this little animal and says, oh, my brother, Wsitkamu, Abistanuj, I have a favor to ask of you. The little marten comes up and goes up to Gluskap, and Gluskap, he says, I have a gift to give you. And the gift was some tobacco. Gluskap had in his hand some tobacco. And he offered it to Abistanuj and says, and Abistanuj held out his hand and he accepted the tobacco. And our elders, they kind of interrupt the story here and they explain that our traditions are very important to us. So when we have a favor to ask of somebody, and we use tobacco as an offering to give to somebody, and say, well, can you do me a favor? And you give the tobacco to that person before asking the favor, and the person receiving the tobacco usually says, yes, ask what you want and I will give to you. And so in this case, Abistanuj apparently took the tobacco and said, what do you want, my brother? I will offer it to you. And Gluskap said, well, you can you give us your life so that grandmother and I can continue to live? Because from your skin, we will be able to make our clothing. From your meat, we will have our food to eat. From your bones, we can make our tools. From your internal organs, we can have medicine, and so on and so forth. And Abistanuj held down his head and he held his tobacco close to his heart and he says, yes, take my life. I give it to you. And so Gluskap picked up the Abistanuj and took him to grandmother, and grandmother laid him down on the ground, snapped his head quickly, and started preparing the little animal. In the meantime, grandmother asked Gluskap, he said, can you gather all the sparks that are left over from the bolt of lightning that caused your creation, and they made a big circle around your creation? So bring 7 of those sparks into the middle where you were created. So Gluskap walks around and picks up 7 sparks and puts them in the middle, one by one. And then grandmother asked Gluskap, can you put 7 pieces of wood and build a wigwam over those sparks? And Gluskap does that. He obeys his grandmother and builds a wigwam over the sparks. And then grandmother tells him, can you call our cousin Whirlwind, Wijosan, to come and visit? And Gluskap calls Wijosan, and Whirlwind arrives from the east and wishes by and continues west and goes north. And in the meantime, Gluskap looks at the sparks. They heated up and ignited the wood. And so next spark. Next spark. next slide. Next spark. So Gluskap created the first Chibuk that we call it. Chi means the biggest, the great. So I was at the Great Spirit Fire. Grandmother started to skin the animal and get it ready for food and tools and all of those things. Meanwhile, Gluskap was tending to the fire. And then he remembered his eagle feather, and he stood up and he took the eagle feather and looked up into the sky, and he says, "Giver of life, thank you for giving us this life. Thank you for giving us the life of Abistanuj, the animal, my little brother," he called him. And this was actually the first covenant between us human beings and the animal world. And we were making almost like a treaty, a relationship with them. And so Gluskap thanked the giver of life and thanked the animal for his life and apologized for taking the life of the animal. He thanked Grandfather Sun for the spirit of the animal, but he also apologized for taking the spirit of the animal away. And he also thanked Mother Earth for providing herself with and providing us with sustenance through the animal, and also apologized. But then he said, if you are all so great, giver of life, Grandfather Sun and Mother Earth, why don't you give back this animal his life so we can share this relationship forever? And lo and behold, an animal woke up where Abistanuj was laying, and Gluskap told him to go back into the forest and we will share this relationship forever. And the animal went back in the forest. In the meantime, grandmother was already cleaning another animal and preparing it for their sustenance. So they had a feast of meat to celebrate grandmother's arrival to the world. And so this is how Gluskap enjoyed. And if you can switch over to the next slide, it's more or less shows you the fire itself. So the fire, the Chibukteo, is where we usually cook our food. We warm ourselves. Grandmother and Gluskap kept adding wood to the fire to keep the spirit of the creator alive. And then Gluskap, after learning everything there was to know about surviving on the land with grandmother, he decided to take a walk down by the shore. And if you can go to the next slide. So walking along the shore, he sees a young man. And he looks at him and he says, "Who are you? Where did you come from?" And the young man says, if you go to the next slide, he says, "I come from the ocean, the salt water, the foam that formed on top of the water." And if you can show the next slide, which we call Bizo. And then the next slide, which is what we call Akchimsiku or Welchema Awel, which is sweetgrass that grows in the marshes. So the young man stood up from the sweetgrass, and it kind of frightened Gluskap, and Gluskap says, "Winetkio Damiwejian," meaning, "Who are you? Where did you come from?" And he says, "Well, I come from the foam of the ocean. When whirlwind passed by, he caused the waters to roil up, and foam began to form on top of the water, and it was blowing ashore, and it was rolling along the sand and picking up all these elements of Mother Earth until it rested on this sweet-smelling grass, the hair of our Mother Earth." And
With the help of the giver of life, Grandfather Sun, and Mother Earth gave me a life of a young man. I come into this world to help you and grandmother. I will help you obtain everything you need. I am young, I am strong, and I have arrived with the vision of our ancestors. Gluskap was happy that the young person had arrived, and he was realized that this young person has these bright looking eyes looking at him. And he says, well, I have to live my life in such a way that I have to leave a legacy of survival for this younger generation. I have to show them how to live, how to be upright and be honorable and respectful of all life around me and among my relatives. So he asked the young man to go back to the waters, and he asked the fish from the oceans and the rivers to offer themselves so that grandmother and the nephew and Gluskap can continue to live. And again, Gluskap raised the eagle feather into the sky, and he thanked Giver of Life for giving them the fish, and he apologized for taking their lives. He thanked Grandfather Sun for the spirit in the fish, and he also asked Mother Earth, he thanked Mother Earth for providing them with the fish, and they were grateful that they were given sustenance through the fish. And grandmother prepared a feast of fish to celebrate the arrival of the young person among our people, among Gluskap. And the young man, his name was Nedawansam, and this was Gluskap's nephew. As Nedawansam explained to him, he said, I come from the ocean. I am your sister's son. I am your nephew. I have come here to help you. I will help you forever. And so this relationship was established, and another covenant was established with the fish. First of all, with the eagle feather and with Gluskap when the eagle arrived. And the symbol was the feather itself in terms of the covenant that our people have with the birds. And then with the animals, we have this relationship with them forever. And now among the fish, we have this relationship forever with the fish, that we can rely on them for our survival. And Gluskap apologized for taking the lives of the fish, the giver of life, Grandfather Sun, and Mother Earth. So one day Gluskap was sitting by the fire. If you can go to the next slide. And as he was sitting by the fire, a woman came and sat beside him and put her arm around him and said, Gauchinan are you cold, my son? And he looked at her and said, Who are you? Where did you come from? And she said, I am Niganaganim Kuzisk. I am your mother. She said, I came from a leaf on the ground that fell to the ground early this morning. And if you can turn to the next slide. She said, I was a leaf early this morning. And with the help of the giver of life, Grandfather Sun, and Mother Earth gave me a life of a young woman. She said, I bring strength for my children. I bring all the colors of the world. I bring love and understanding. And I want my children to rely upon each other so that they will be able to survive and to live. Because if we don't rely on one another as a family, we will not survive. We will die off. And Gluskap was happy that his mother came into the world. Next slide. He asked his nephew to go and gather food from the plants and the trees and the berries and the tubers that were growing underground. So his nephew brought all these fruits and vegetables together, and grandmother prepared a feast to celebrate the survival of Gluskap's mother. And this is how the creation story begins, with the 7 levels of creation. We have the giver of life, who gave life and put the world here as we see it, the moon and the sun and the sky and the clouds, everything. And then we have grandfather son that put spirit into everything that has shadow, and he's alive with the shadow, the movement of its shadow. And then Mother Earth, who sustains life with all the food, plants, animals, and fish, in combination with the earth, the water, the fire, and the wind. So next level. So in the next level, I talk about creation and the ceremonies, the sacred ceremonies. Why do we do ceremonies? And how did it come about that we do ceremonies? And this image of smoke, really beautiful smoke curling up into the sky. It's a smoke from sweetgrass being burned. And the smoke itself represents our words. The person who is doing a ceremony, his words are going up with the smoke that arises from burning sweetgrass or burning sage or burning cedar. And these are elements, sacred plants that we usually light up and burn. And some other cultures use even trees that they just light up and they ignite and they blow them out and they smolder, and they offer the smoke from those. And the meaning of the smoke itself is it's sacred because it represents the words of the ceremonial keeper, like myself. I'm a ceremonialist. I look after a pipe. I look after a sweat lodge, and I also do ceremonies, blessings with sweetgrass and sage. So as a ceremonialist, I have to understand why we do those things. And so when you flip over to the next level, we have what we call a buktu, chibuktu. And the eagle had come back to Gluskap, and he when they were around the fire, and they were all around, sitting around the fire, Gluskap, his grandmother, his nephew, and his mother. And the eagle tells Gluskap, he says, "You and grandmother have to leave this world. You have to follow the path of whirlwind, Rejosen, to go west and then go north. And someday, when the Mi'kmaq people or the people on this world face extinction, you will come back and you will help them. You will save them." And so Gluskap and grandmother agreed and accepted this message from Gitpu, the eagle. So before leaving, he was also told that his mother and his nephew have to look after this fire. It must never go out. And because Gluskap was told that out of this fire, a spark will fly and hit the earth, and a woman is going to be created. And then another spark will fly out, another woman, and another woman. Altogether, 7 women will be created. And then later on, another spark will fly out. A man is going to be created. And another spark and another, until 7 more sparks will create 7 men. And together it will form the 7 original families of what we call these Algonquian-speaking nations, Mi'kmaq being one of them, the Abenaki being the other, the Innu, formerly called the Montagnais, would be the other, the Ojibwe, the other, the Cree, the other, the Blackfoot, the other, the Wampanoags, and the other, down around New England states. So altogether, there were 7 original families. And Gluskap was told that after the creation of 7 families, they will gather their sparks from the Chibukto, the great spirit fire, and they will disperse into 7 sacred directions. 7, and the Mi'kmaq were told to go travel east to Eastern North America. And so this is how the creation story kind of established. And Gluskap was told that after they leave the area of the fire and disperse themselves, they will divide themselves furthermore into 7 more groups, 7 clans. And today we have what we call the 7 districts of the Mi'kmaq Grand Council. And the Grand Council itself are the originators of the Mi'kmaq creation story. And the 7 elements of the Mi'kmaq creation story, the 7 levels represent the 7 clans of the Mi'kmaq people. From the west, we have our we call them Mawiomis. It's actually their council fires. And so we have one in an area called Listuguj, which is in Gaspésie, in Quebec. And it encompasses a little bit of New Brunswick, what we call our Mi'kmaq traditional territory. And then the next one is Siguniktuk, which is a little bit further down south of the Acadian Peninsula, Miramichi, all the way down the province of New Brunswick into Nova Scotia, as far as Oxford and Chignecto Peninsula. That's why they call that council fire Siguniktuk, which is the Mi'kmaq word for Chignecto. And then Prince Edward Island and Pictou Landing was another a council fire area. And so we call it Ebekwit Apiktukwani. And then we go into Nova Scotia and go to the south side. We call it Gespogwitk. It's like you took the whole province of Nova Scotia and it's like looks like a canoe, and the bottom end of it is sitting in the water. So that Gespogwitk is like it's sitting on water, the tail end. So that's another council district, Council Mawiomi. And then Segabanegadik, the term today is they say Shubenacadie. Segaban is actually a wild root, a potato, kind of a mix between a potato and a turnip. And it grew wild in around the area of Sugabanegadik. So that's where we would go to gather this wild potato. And then towards Cape Breton on the mainland side is called Eskegia. And that's where our people used to go and gather. They used to gather the walrus because the walrus had a very thick hide, and we used the walrus hide to form the bottoms of our moccasins and our mucklucks, or whatever you call what we wore in the winter time. And so it was tough skin, so it lasted for a long time. And eskegia is to the peeling, the skinning place. So that's the name of that council fire, the Mawiomi. And then in Cape Breton, we call it Unamagi. Un means fog, but Unji means the head. So it has a double connotation. It's the land of the fog, and it's also the head of the land. And that's where our Grand Chief usually resides. It's in Cape Breton. And our current Grand Chief, Norman Siliboy, lives in Eskasoni in Cape Breton. So anyway, Unamagi is the seventh or the first, you could, whatever direction you start. I mean, it's the first in the east, but it also includes Ta'amkuk, which is St. Pierre and Miquelon and Magdalen Islands and Newfoundland as part of our Unamagi district. So there is 7. And so this is how we honor the separation of our families. Each of those 7 original families would divide themselves into 7 clans as well. So next slide. So we have what we call Anigom. It's a ceremony. Gluskap was told, after the passing of 7 winters, your original families, the Mi'kmaq being one of them, will gather all their 7 rocks from each of their clans. And they will bring back one of their original sparks that the women were given the responsibility to carry in between 2 shells, 2 kohak shells, and they would use a species of fungus that when it's ignited, it will burn, and you burn it long enough, it'll start a spark, and you blow out the fire, and it will smolder. That piece of fungus will smolder for at least a whole week inside of that shell, where one of our women are given the responsibility to look after this great spirit fire, the spark from it. So we bring all those rocks together, the 7 original families. They come back together, and to celebrate the creation, as I showed you earlier, the Chibukto, the spark from the giver of life and grandfather, son, and mother earth that caused the creation of Gluskap. And those sparks created the first fire, the Chibukto. And so this is how we honor the first creation, by lighting the fire itself. There is a ceremony involved in that, and I'll just tell you, there's a firekeeper ceremony, and they put medicines in the ground first, the healing medicines, and then they put tobacco and sage and sweetgrass, and then birch bark, and then kindling, and so on, and so they light the fire. And this is the first part of the ceremony of coming together, is lighting the fire. And in order not to forget the significance of the grandmother that owed her existence from the rock on the ground, we come together and celebrate in what we call Anigom. And Anigom, Ani is sort of the womb of women. Ani, Wajimani from my mother. I came out of my mother's womb. And so Anigom is sort of like the womb of our mother. And it's created out of 7 saplings bent over, 2 east and west, 2 north and south, 1 diagonally, each side, and then the 7th one around to kind of form, and the frame that you see in front of you I haven't I got the skills well enough to take one sapling and bend it over from one end to the other. So I had to use I don't know 14, 15, maybe 20 some saplings to make the frame of the lodge. And according to our creation story, it was made out of 7 saplings all together, and also covered with seven animals, 7 7 different animals like bear, moose, deer, wolf, caribou, and so on. So next slide. So in the modern context, you would see that this sweat lodge is covered with modern material. The sweat lodge itself is covered with quilted moving blankets inside. So the blankets themselves absorb the steam that is created inside, and the plastic on the outside contains the steam inside of the lodge, so it doesn't dissipate into the air. So this is inside the lodge. Gluskap was instructed by the eagle that the 7 grand chiefs of the 7 original families will come together and sit around the circle inside of and there would be a hole in the ground in the middle where they would accept the rocks. And grandmother is represented by the rock on the ground. She was a rock. If you go into the next, you will see images of rocks. And these are the type of rocks. I mean, these rocks are dark, kind of blackish, dark gray color. And they're not shale, they're not soft rocks, they're pretty hard, almost slate-like. And so we gather 47 of those together. And if we can flip back 2 slides. If that's possible, I hope that doesn't create any technical difficulties for us. So that's the sweat lodge itself with the deer antlers that we use to move the heated rocks around inside. So if you go one more slide back, you will see the inside of the sweat lodge. So we are seated around, and there is a blanket of cedar boughs laid along the ground, around the middle part, which has the stones that will come inside. So all of us are seated around, 7 of us, the grand chiefs of 7 nations, Algonquian nations. And so we are seated around inside in a circle, facing the middle of it, where there is a hole dug in the ground, and the whole thing is covered with animal skins. And so we call outside to bring in the rocks, because grandmother's the one that owed her existence from the rock. So we call these rocks grandmother rocks. Gijin, Giju, Gundel, Giju. Some of the other tribal groups, cultural groups going westward in Canada and United States, they call their rocks grandfather rocks. And they have their rationale because they have different versions of the creation story. But us here in Eastern Canada, we refer to them as grandmother rocks, because grandmother owed her creation from these rocks. So we bring in seven rocks during the first round. After everybody seated down inside, we smudge ourselves and we smoke the pipe, and we share the pipe. But I will get to those ceremonies pretty soon. But this is a sweat lodge ceremony. And so in there, we sit around, we call upon 7 rocks. Individuals outside, they're called the fire keepers, and some of them are called the rock keepers, and some of them are called the door keepers. So the doorkeepers are instructed to keep the door open, and so the pipe is handed out, the smudge bowl is handed out, and so they ask for the rocks to come in, and they bring in the rocks using antlers that are tied on a long stick, and we would roll out the rocks that have been placed in the fire. So the fire has been burning, let's say, outside for about an hour, with the rocks having been piled inside. And there's a ceremony around those rocks as well, prayers around those rocks, and we cover those rocks with wood and start the fire and let the fire burn for about an hour. And once the fire has been burning for an hour, we go back and we bring in the rocks. So the lodge keeper is the one that keeps track of everything, and he asked him, "Can you bring in the first rock that represents the giver of life?" So they bring in the first rock, and they smudge. They will take the sweetgrass and rub the sweetgrass on the rock itself, because the rock is red hot. And so when you touch the sweetgrass on it, the sweetgrass right away starts burning. And so this is how we bless the rocks, each of the rocks that come in. And so I don't need the sweetgrass now, because I'm going to be explaining the ceremony of the sweetgrass itself in a minute. So you can go back to the frame of the lodge. Okay, leave it there then. So we're inside the lodge, and the door is still open, and the rocks are being passed in, and they're placed inside the middle, which has been dug in the ground so that the rocks don't roll around and burn people inside. So the first one is the giver of life. The next rock is grandfather sun. The next rock is Mother Earth. The next one is Gluskap. The next one is grandmother. The next one is nephew, and the next one is mother. So altogether we have 7 rocks, and the lodge keeper will ask the doorkeeper to close the door, and so they close the door itself, and so it's all dark inside, and the only thing that you can see is the glowing rocks themselves. And the lodge keeper himself is sitting on the other end, facing the sun. So the door of the sweat lodge is facing east, and so the lodge keeper on the other end is sitting there. He's got a container of water. We make containers out of birch bark, and the water itself is full of boughs from cedar, sweetgrass, some sage, and spruce. And this is a mixture of medicine in the water that is going to be splashed on the stones by the lodge keeper. And so he splashes the rocks 3 times, and he says, "Oh, we have come together. We are giving celebration. We are having to connect back to our ancestors, and we are giving thanks for our own creation, the giver of life, grandfather, son, mother, and so on and so forth." So he explains the Mi'kmaq creation story to those others around him. And anyway, so he says that this first round is dedicated to the grandmothers, our own grandmothers. And this is the meaning of the sweat lodge ceremony, is because of those rocks that we heat up. And we're also replicating our own creation by crawling inside with no clothes on. And we're sitting around in a circle, and the water on the rocks creates the sweat. and we start to sweat ourselves. And then he'll just tap the person to his left and tell him to start speaking about grandmothers and giving thanks to our grandmothers. And so we go around in the whole circle, everybody, all the chiefs talk about their own grandmothers in their own language and acknowledge their existence and their creation and the meaning of grandmothers and their wisdom and knowledge. And so after everybody has gone around in the circle praying and giving thanks to grandmothers everywhere and all of our grandmothers, and so finally the lodge keeper asked the people to start singing. And so we start singing, Give me de manage, dan delio no ti, nigamach do, ke mawi danage. Give me de manage, dan wedabek solti. And so it goes on. And so the song is completed, 4 rounds, and then the lodge keeper will ask, he'll throw, like each time a person prays and finish praying, they say, Wsitkamu, all my relations. And so that's the signal for the next person to start speaking. And the lodge keeper will splash twice on the rocks with the water, with the cedar bough. And each of those times that he splashes water, you can smell the cedar and the sage and the sweetgrass and the spruce coming at you, and you could feel the heat coming at you from your back as well, because the heat rises and it kind of like forms like a mushroom on top, and the heat kind of dissipates behind you. And so once that is all done, the lodge keeper will tell the doorkeeper to open up the door. Pantarugan. So the door is open and the steam kind of emanates out of the middle of the lodge, and everybody takes a deep breath and kind of relaxes. And so the lodge keeper will tell stories, and sometimes they will tell different kind of stories to each other and explain where they come from and so on and so forth, just to getting to know each other. And then finally the lodge keeper will say, okay, bring in 7 more rocks. 7 more rocks will be representing the 7 original families. And so they bring in 7 more rocks to represent the 7 clans of each of those 7 families. And so when the rocks are all in place, the old ones are still still hot, but they're slowly cooled down with the water being poured on them. But the new rocks, they also add more heat, and so water is splashed on them as well, and the door is closed. And so the first one to speak is the lodge keeper, and he says, we're going to honor our own creation, the seven clans of each of the 7 families. And so they talk around, each one acknowledging their own clan and recognizing the importance of family and their relationship and the 7 original families. And so they talk around in a circle, and then they open again, the steam goes out. And I think I just jumped ahead of my story, but the 7 original families was the second round, and they're honoring the grandmothers to the south. The first round was honoring Gluskap to the east, and now it's the grandmother to the south. Sorry, I'm confusing you, but initially I should have said the east. The first round was to honor leadership and Gluskap, and the second round is to honor grandmothers to the south. The third round is to honor the young people to the west, and we bring in the 7 rocks. And this is where the confusion lies. It's because the next 7 rocks represent the 7 original families. no, the 7 clans of the 7 original families. The door is closed, and we continue honoring the 7 clans of each of those 7 families. And again, each time the lodge keeper splashes water on the rocks, and steam is being created. The elevation of the heat is slowly rising, and our bodies can endure up to about 105, 104 degrees of heat of our bodies before we start to spin out uh, but the lodge keepers are the knowledge keepers as well. They know how many rocks are needed to keep a space the size of a sweat lodge heated. And so they know, and so they were able to gauge the size of the rocks we use and how much heat that is generated inside the sweat lodge, so that we don't burn anybody or steam anybody out in there. So the last round is devoted to the north, our mothers. The east to the giver of to the east to Gluskap, leadership. The south to grandmothers. The west to the mothers, to the young people, and the north to our mothers. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit overwinded here. So we honor the 4 sacred directions, but also each of those 7 rocks has a significance. And the last round is devoted to the 7 sacred medicines that we have, sweetgrass being one of them, and muskrat root, and each of the 7 original families had their own responsibility to a sacred medicine. And our responsibility was what we call Kisu'lk, which is a muskrat root or blue flag. And it's the root of the plant that we use. We dig them out, we hang them up to dry, and then we scrape them to make a powder out of them to heat. We put them in boiling water, or we boil the water and then take it off from boiling and then put the medicine in, and then we drink that as medicinal purposes for our lungs, sinuses, cough, sore throat, ailing hearts, and so on and so forth. So it's a strong medicine. And the last round in the sweat lodge, honoring those sacred medicines, each one is given to each of the 7 leaders of the 7 original families, so that in the end, each of those leaders has 7 sacred medicines in a pouch when they leave the sweat lodge. So they honor those medicines in the lodge, and they speak of the medicinal values of each of those and so on. And at the end of the lodge, the door is open and the steam comes out, and everybody crawls out. They usually start from, if I'm facing the door itself and I'm the lodge keeper, the first one that's sitting next to the door or the exit will crawl out. And usually from all the heat and the sweat inside, most of us are red hot and sweating. And we're either happy or crying and laughing, and we're red. And so it's like a rebirth of human beings coming out of the womb of our mother from the sweat lodge. We come out all hot and red and crying or laughing. And so this is the significance of the sweat lodge ceremony. I'm going into a lot of detail with this. So that's the significance of the grandmother and the sweat lodge ceremony. So we can go next to the sweetgrass, which is also in honor and significance of the how the nephew arrived into the world. So we have what we call Kisu'lk or Wsitkamu. This is the sweetgrass that grows in meadows along the coastline, mostly here in Atlantic Canada. But it also grows on in the prairies, in the highlands, and in Alberta and Saskatchewan. They gather sweetgrass as well, but they will get it mostly around rivers and close to the rivers. So we gather the sweetgrass and we braid it to give honor and significance to the hair of our mother, the earth. And so if you go to the next slide, we light up the sweetgrass. And see, this is a braid of sweetgrass burning. And so we blow out the light. And so the smoke itself is the element that we use. So when we light the sweetgrass, we honor the creation of the nephew who came from the sweetgrass, the ocean, the sand, the beach, pebbles, fish bones, everything else that comes from the land is in him. So he comes from Mother Earth itself. And so we honor the creation of the nephew. And we light the sweetgrass. And we also honor the 7 sacred parts to the head of what Gluskap was given, 2 ears to cleanse our ears, that we listen from the goodness of our heart, our eyes, we look from the goodness. We cleanse our eyes from the smudge, the smoke from the sweetgrass. Then we smudge our noses and our mouth, and then our heart and the rest of our body, our arms, our legs, and behind us. And this is how we do a sweetgrass smudging ceremony. We cleanse our minds with that smoke from the sweetgrass. And we also offer the smoke to everybody else around us who is committed to engaging in a sacred ceremony. So we smudge everybody else, and everybody else cleanses themselves. So that's the sweetgrass ceremony. And then to honor the mother of Gluskap, next slide, we take the leaves of a plant, which happens to be tobacco leaves in this instance. So we take the tobacco, demawe, we call it edemawe. When you put something on a plate, edemo, and put something into like a cup like this, we duma. So demawe is what we put into something. And we dry this leaf, and we use it as our tobacco. And this is in honor and respect of Gluskap's mother, who came from a leaf of a tree or a plant. And so we take this leaf and plant, and we make offerings with it. We would take a clump of tobacco and we say, "Giver of life, thank you for giving us this life," and so on. "Grandfather, son, thank you for my shadow and seeing my ancestors." And we take that pinch of tobacco and put it into the fire. We take another pinch and we touch Mother Earth with it, and we thank Mother Earth, and then we put it into the fire. We take another pinch and face the east where the sun is rising. We thank Gluskap for giving us leadership, and so on and so forth. And we put the tobacco in the fire. Then we go face the south with another pinch of tobacco, and we thank the grandmothers for their wisdom and knowledge, and so on and so forth. And then we face the west for the young people, for their strength and their young youth and vision. And we put it in the fire. We take another pinch of tobacco and face the north and thank our mothers for bringing us into this world and teaching us to love and share and rely on each other. And this is what we call a tobacco offering ceremony. Next slide. And So in the next slide, you see stones. This is a representation of our grandmother, the rock. And we take this slate stone that we able to get in a place called Duma'anapsk. It's a brook up in the Miramichi in the forest, inland of the northwest Miramichi River, inland in the forest. There's a brook that's called the brook of where we obtain the rocks for the pipes, the Ma'anapsk, we call it. The river is called, the brook itself is called the Ma'anapsk. If you look it up today, you'll find it on the maps. And so that's where we go to obtain this rock. And this same rock, we make our pipes, stone pipes. So the stone itself represents grandmother, and then the stem of the pipe itself, we connect the stem of the pipe. It is made out of wood, and there's a hole in the end, so you can draw from it. And we join the grandmother with the mother, the stem. And next slide. So these are joined together, the spirit of the grandmother and the spirit of the mother. And then we take the tobacco and we fill the pipe 7 times, offering the tobacco each time, oh, giver of life, thank you. And we put it in the pipe. Grandfather, son, thank you. And we put it in the pipe. Mother Earth, thank you, put it in the pipe. To the east, Gluskap, thank you, we put it in the pipe. To the south, grandmother, put it in the pipe. To the west, the young people, we put it in the pipe. And to the north, our mothers, we put it in the pipe. So all together, we fill the pipe 7 times. And this is how we are able to do the pipe ceremony. And what we do is we light the pipe with the braid of sweetgrass. So we take the sweetgrass and we would light the pipe with it. I forgot my I wasn't intending to use my everywhere. But anyway, this is the pipe itself, and this is the sweetgrass, and it's lit on this end, and it's put inside the mouth of the pipe. And so it's the young person itself, sweetgrass, the nephew, that we light our mother, the tobacco, in the bowl of grandmother. And we draw the smoke from the stem of the pipe, like we would draw from it, like this. And then blow the smoke up to the giver of life. We don't inhale the smoke. It is not proper and it is not right to inhale the smoke. And that's what's killing our people today. But we never inhaled the smoke when we did the ceremony of the pipe. And so we blow it to the sky, the giver of life. We blow it to the sky, to grandfather, son. We blow it below us. And like when we blow to the sky, to grandfather, son, we also blow it to our heart and lungs among ourselves. And then we blow it to the earth, Mother Earth. Then we blow it in the direction of the rising sun to Gluskap, to the south grandmothers, to the west young people, to the north our mothers. And so that is what we call the Mi'kmaq creation story, and the meaning and significance of our ceremonies, because we are negotiating for our survival. We're negotiating with giver of life, grandfather, son, and Mother Earth. but we're also negotiating with the four elements of Mother Earth: the plants, birds, animals, and fish, and combined with the soil, the fire, the water, and the air, we are able to obtain our survival. And it also explains our relationship with the birds, plants, animals, and fish as being our own relatives. So we have to treat everything with respect and dignity. And so this is how the Mi'kmaq peoples survived for thousands of years, longer than 12,000 years. I mean, there have been archaeologists in South America, granddaughter of Roosevelt. She was an archaeologist. She found carbon from a fire from inside a cave in the Altiplano, they call it, and they were sure that it had been around 35 to 40,000 years old. So indigenous people in North America firmly believe that we originate from here in North America, and then all these new discoveries, they're bringing back elements of rock and soil from a meteorite in space, and they think humanity might have started from there. I don't know. It could be a spark from a bolt of lightning. Could have been a comet. We never know. Our history and science has not really been delicate enough to really look back that far. And they can only say we're millions of years old and billions, the Earth itself. But humanity itself, I can't really put a date to it. But this is our explanation of our own humanity that in North America. So I will end it there. It's so I will open it up for questions.
Stephen, Helen here.
Yes.
We have two questions. They're both from, at the moment, the same person, Cherry, but we'll deal with them separately if that's okay with you. The first
Okay.
question, she says hello, and her first question is, she noticed that in your creation story, the number 7 is important. It is in Christianity as well, she says. For Christians, it means wholeness or completeness, maybe even perfection. Does the number 7 hold a similar meaning for your tradition?
It is a very sacred number for us, and I know that the Jewish tradition also values the number 7 among themselves, as well as other religious groups. But for us, I mean, it's just the significance of the elements of creation itself. And just so happened, I mean, it didn't happen this way. I mean, that's the first 7 levels of creation. I mean, one gives life, the other puts spirit into life, and the other sustains life. I mean, and it's not. It's just seems to be similarity in the Trinity in Christianity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. But it just, I don't know. It is only similar, but I can't say it's the same thing.
Thank you, Steve. The second question that Cherry asks says that she recognizes the spiritual and physical value of the sweat lodge and the rebirth that it brings. Was the physical value, the cleaning of toxins, etc., always recognized as part of the ceremony, or was it a side benefit of a ceremony mainly done for remembering and spiritual healing?
Well, today, I mean, the sweat lodge ceremony is being used by various people. I mean, way back when there were only men that did the sweat lodge. Today we have women doing sweat lodge ceremonies, and we also have women chiefs throughout North America, and so there seems to be more like an opening for doing ceremony with women as well. So initially, I don't, the knowledge factor, I compare science and traditional knowledge on equal footing. I'm not saying science is better than traditional knowledge, and I'm not saying traditional knowledge is better. But you can imagine for thousands of years, indigenous people experimenting with medicines, the values of all those medicines, and the significance of doing ceremony with heated rocks and cedar and spruce. And all of those things carry medicinal value. And by indigenous perspectives, I mean, if you're sick or if you're ill, it's because you did something bad to a spiritual element somewhere. Like you took a life of an animal and didn't take it home to eat. So that could be something that our elders will tell us you did wrong, and that's why you're sick. That's why you broke your ankle, or you broke your arm or wrist or whatever, or a finger. And so a lot of times they bring you back into ceremony to help heal you back. And these are the kind of signals our elders used to use. I mean, when somebody saw an owl hunting during the day, like hunting mice, picking up mice during the day, broad daylight. Owls don't usually hunt during the day. They have some kind of an extra sensory perception that they can hunt at night, and they can grab a mouse or whatever for food during night. And then when the elders have been told this, they will go back and say, well, somebody did something wrong, but they don't actually point to an individual. And they say, somebody in our family or in our community, let's get back together, bring the rocks, heat the rocks, let's do ceremony. Let's do a sweat lodge to help heal whatever wrong that happened. So that's how ceremonies and healing are referred to. And it's like a spirit has entered into your humanity, and that spirit has to be brought out and appeased, I guess, because when we go out and we go hunting or fishing, whatever, we're always doing ceremony before we go, because we have to communicate with the spirits of the animal, and hopefully we're offering something of value to them, and saying we're giving you this so that we don't scare you away. We don't intend to scare you away. We just want to take what we need to continue to live and to survive. And so that's where ceremony comes in. And this is why we always keep, there's a terminology in our culture. It's called nedugalimk. And that is using those principles and values and ethics to be able to obtain our livelihood from the land, from our mother, the earth.
Thank you. Olga asks a question. Has the history of the creation story changed over time? Are there newer elements that will be coming forward?
I cannot answer that question, honestly, in the sense that we didn't have a written language. And so I don't know how they practiced 10,000 years ago. let's say around Dibert, where they were living on that site and location. So, I mean, I can only account for what I have done. And in the sweat lodge, in my own sweat lodge, I used moving blankets that I bought from Walmart or a moving company. And I used a plastic tarp to cover the sweat lodge. I use metal forks, like a pitchfork with an extended handle, and the pitchfork is kind of cut in a way that I can pick up stones and they don't roll off the fork. They're bent in a way that I can pick up the stone and then bring it into the lodge, and then deposit it there and roll it, and not burn anybody, and so on. So those and my own pipe bag itself is made out of some duffel, some glass beads, a deer hide, some moose hide. So yes, I mean, in a sense, there is a sense of adaptation, I guess, taking place by individuals. And there are some of us, our people. I mean, I can recall my uncle, great uncle, I mean, doing a ceremony and trying not to use stone axes and metal knives and modern implements and instruments to do his own ceremony. So some of us, I guess, try to reach back as far as we can to the original basis of our traditions. But our collective memories, I don't think can take us far enough back. Maybe I think the only basic elements of this ceremony, like the rocks itself, the sweetgrass, the tobacco, the pipe, the shells, and the knowledge and the songs that we sing, they contribute to bringing our ceremony together, and the dances we dance. I mean, it's like a two-step. It's like the heartbeat of our mother. Dun-dun, dun-dun, dun-dun. And there's different phases of those heartbeats. If you're excited, it goes faster, and if you're relaxing and sleeping, your heartbeat will beat in a slower rate. And then if you're up walking around, well, it kind of beats the normal beat, I guess. And so the same with the drum beat. Our people dance to the drum, and that's part of our way of acknowledging, like the land acknowledgement that was verbally made at the beginning. Our own land acknowledgement is the stamping of our feet on our own Mother Earth, saying, "Here we are, your children. We come from you. We belong to you."
Thank you, Stephen. We have a question from Susan. Older females, grandmothers, mothers, seem to have valued roles in your stories. How is that value being continued in spirituality today?
It is a tradition that is slowly coming back to our culture, but we were well, I guess invaded. I guess early on. The French arrived in the 1600s, 1497, I guess, when Cabot arrived, and later on, I mean, French people arrived in the 1600s, and then the New Englanders started raiding the French, and and then the American Revolution, and then the United Loyalists kind of arrived here and settled. So England and United States, I mean, separated each other, and British North America became all these colonies of Great Britain and England, and eventually Canada created in 76. So the government, they just took over the land, and it's only been recent, within the last 30, 40 years of my life, that the government has been slowly giving back the land and some money to compensate Indigenous peoples in Canada through land claim settlements. But the education process was another matter. The residential schools, they started gathering the young people and bringing them into schools in the United States. It was in Carlisle and Pennsylvania, and that's where they brought children in a school, residential school, or what you would call a industrialized school. And so they brought children there, and they lived there pretty well all their lives since they were like 5, 6 years old. And in some instances, children were even taken away from mothers, and the nuns took care of the little babies until they became old enough to become school children. And people were left in the residential schools until they were 16. And in the Indigenous communities, they gathered children and brought them into the schools. In our First Nations communities, they were called Indian day schools. And it's a similar regime. They were run by nuns and priests, and the idea was to educate the Indian out of the child, and to teach them how to dress like Europeans, and to learn Christianity, to become Catholics or Anglicans or whatever religion across Canada that took responsibility over education for Indians on Indigenous reserves. And so there was a colonization process taking place early on. I mean, 1820s in Upper Canada, in Eastern Canada. I mean, the Jesuits started teaching Indian children in Port Royal in 1610 onward. So all that to say that the federal government of Canada and the provinces had responsibility for education, but the federal government took over responsibility for Indians, but they also took over the responsibility for the education and the health of the Indigenous people in Canada. So it was through the Indian Act system. They told us how to elect our chiefs. I'm a hereditary chief. So I'm not an elected chief, so I am not recognized as an official leader of my Mi'kmaq people. But my Mi'kmaq people see me as their traditional governance leader. But the federal government fails and continues to not recognize our Grand Council as a legitimate element of governance, like a traditional governance. So our people were educated to become, to dress like non-Indigenous Canadians and speak like them and believe like them in Catholicism or whatever religion there was. And so these residential schools and Indian day schools were in existence in our reserves until around 1980. 1996, I think, was the last one residential school that closed in Canada. But there were over 150,000 children that went through the Indian residential schools, and over 500,000 children that went through the Indian day schools, educated to become just Canadian ordinary citizens. And our own languages and spirituality were educated out of us. And it's only been within the last 30, 40 years that our people have been learning back, bringing back their own traditions. And I was fortunate enough to be raised by my great-grandparents who didn't go to residential school and who didn't go to school, and my grandparents, my grandmother and my grandfather, who were born in the 1890s, they didn't go to school. They didn't go to residential school, and they didn't go to school. But my grandfather's, my mother's sisters, three of them went to residential school, and and I almost went to residential school, but if it wasn't for my dad, who was in the military, I'd come home when the Indian agent and the RCMP came to pick me up from my house, and my brother was already in the car, and I was being dragged out with my mother holding my other arm, and the Indian agent in the other, and the policeman standing there telling my mother, "You're going to be arrested if you don't let go." And my father arrives with a military uniform on, and he grabs me, and he opens the car and takes my brother out of there, and tells the Indian agent to get off the porch, and literally he knocked him out, and the Indian agent was laying on the porch of our house, and the RCMP just picked him up, put him in the car, and he saluted my dad and drove away. And that's how I got to be saved from not going to residential school. I think it was in 1956. I would have been around 7 years old at the time. Anyway, so our people have been colonized. I too have been colonized, but having the knowledge and being old enough to remember the teachings of my great-grandparents and both of my grandparents, as well as my parents, my mother and my father and my uncles and so on, I've kept the way of my traditions and kept my language alive. I am 74 years old, and I'm grateful for that. And that's the reason why today our people are having all of those encounters with alcoholism, drug addiction, is when they were taught to be like white people. And I'm sorry for using that expression, but I said I wouldn't say that word. Non-Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous society. We were taught to become industrious and knowledgeable, like the children of the non-Indigenous cultures and societies, and to believe in everything that they believed in. So our way of life was told to us that it was bad, and we should be ashamed of our culture and traditions. So that's the kind of cloud that we come from. I mean, I say cloud because there was a big cloud of colonization that drifted over our culture, our traditions, over our lands, and now we're trying to pick up the pieces. People like myself and others that are gone to university and have gotten educated are turning around and trying to educate our people about the Mi'kmaq creation story, and so on and so forth. Even the government of Canada, the Canada Mint, minted a coin representing the Mi'kmaq creation story. It's a $20 silver coin that was minted in the beginning of August, and Canada Mint has that coin available. It's for sale to Canadians who collect these kind of things. But they honored the Mi'kmaq creation story by minting a coin.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And
You're welcome.
you started to speak in a way that is part of the answer maybe to the next question, because Linda was stating how much of a challenge it is to pass down stories and traditions to succeeding generations. And she's asking, and again, you started to talk a little about this, do you find the young people of today take pride in learning their history and customs? In your own?
I think, yes, I would say there is now a growing number of young people who want to be educated in their own culture and traditions. And some of our Indigenous communities have restarted or have started what they call a bicultural, bilingual education system in our First Nations communities. And Eskasoni is one of them, which to the greatest help of leaders like educational leaders like Dr. Marie Batiste, who got her education. She got her master's degree in education in Harvard, and she got her doctorate degree in Stanford University. And she focused on the language, the Mi'kmaq language, and the Mi'kmaq culture, and the bicultural education process. And after she graduated, she moved back to Canada, and she is from Chapel Island. It's called Bodlodek today. And so she originates from there. So she helped her communities, Mi'kmaq communities in Cape Breton, and more especially Eskasoni, to help develop the bilingual, bicultural program. And with the help of Merdina Marshall and others like Bernie Francis, with the language dictionary and ethnography, and many others, Joe B. Marshall, Alec Denny, Noel Doucette from Chapel Island. So they've been able to establish their own education authority. It's called Mi'kmaq Ganamadnewe, and it initially encompassed the 13 First Nations communities in Nova Scotia. And they're the organization that manages the money for the education system that is being it had been managed by the federal government through the Department of Indian Affairs, and slowly the authority is being passed over to our own people in our own education authorities in our communities. So Eskasoni has a bilingual program starting from nursery, kindergarten, grade 1, right up to grade 12. And students that have graduated from that bilingual program go to universities. They come to Cape Breton University. And so we have also Unama'ki College at Cape Breton University, and it provides all these educational programs and courses. And I also have been teaching the Mi'kmaq creation story, the early history of the Mi'kmaq in Eastern Canada, contact after contact, the early French Port Royal at Louisbourg, and the French and English wars, the American Revolution, the loyalists arriving in Canada from 1784, 83, 84, right up to the 1800s, and then Canada happening. And so I teach about residential schools and the history of the Mi'kmaq people, introduction to Indigenous studies, introduction to ONU studies, Mi'kmaq treaties, treaties of peace and friendship, the establishment of residential schools, and so on. And that has been going on at Unama'ki College since around the 1990s. I think around early 80s. So it's quite a long process. And St. Thomas University in New Brunswick, UNB, Mount Allison and Sackville, St. Francis Xavier, Antigonish, Dalhousie University, King's College, Mount St. Vincent, and St. Mary's University. So these are all in Acadia. They're all doing now a process of indigenizing the institution. But for some Indigenous people, it's not fast enough. It's not going fast enough. It's too slow of a process. And for even some of our Indigenous people, they say, well, we can't send our young people to go to a university to learn our language. Our language is in our communities, so they have to learn it from our own elders in our own community. So it's a kind of a some way halfway point where our people are sending young people to university to learn about anthropology and linguistics, and to use those knowledge factors to help enhance our languages in our communities. But yeah, I mean, advancing forward, I mean, we're using technology right now in me educating a group of people about my culture and traditions, where I would not have been able to do it had I been standing outside alone talking to the forest. So yes, there is a sense of adaptation, and I think the process of negotiation continues with our culture and traditions. Like we're negotiating still today for our survival with the government. I mean, we look at education, we look at housing, we look at infrastructure, policing, justice systems, and so on and so forth. And we have to get funding from the federal government because Indigenous peoples don't have their own source of revenue. It's the government, it's the non-Indigenous society, the mainstream society that have the Canadian government, the provincial governments, the municipalities, through their own taxation systems. They've been able to obtain money for the Treasury Board. And that money is helping to support Indigenous cultures. But what the Indigenous people are saying that we're not getting enough. And why can't we have our own source revenues? And this is where the land claim process comes in. And it's a slow process. And the federal, provincial governments are slowly coming in to the tables and negotiating final settlements of some of the land claim that have been launched by the Indigenous societies across Canada.
Thank you again, Stephen. Stephen, I had a little note from Bill saying that we're having some problems with your internet connection. We can still see you right now, but he said it's getting very weak, and he suggests that maybe it's time for us to end the session. If that's okay with
That
you.
sounds like a signal.
Yeah, I would say thank
That
you very
sounds like a. You're welcome.
I would like to thank you for this very informative session today. I think that although many of us have seen the impact of the schools, it doesn't hurt to hear from anyone's perspective, from another perspective, another person. Also, though, the creation story, I think, will stay with us. And people have asked, there has been a story here saying, a question earlier, mentioning that there was so much information and checking to be sure this was going to be on the website so people could listen at least one more time. Thank you for taking the time and
Yes.
putting up with the technology. And we wish you well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes.